Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. Today we're going to be talking about the high school. There's been a conversation going on for a while about whether or not we need a new high school, a renovated school, or anything in between, or nothing. So today's conversation is going to be directed at one specific thing to start with, and that is a statement of intent that the town has to send to the Massachusetts School Building Authority to indicate that we are interested in having their help in developing a study of what it is that we need. And if we eventually end up being accepted in that program, we also are able to get money from the program. If we don't participate with the state, we don't get state funds if we ever do anything with the building. So anyway, that's just the quick 2-second, I don't know. And anyway, let's go to my guests. All right, we have, from my left, John Cronin, Vice Chair of the Board of Selectmen, Ken Szajda, Chair of the Finance Committee, and Dr. Brad Jackson from the Superintendent of Schools. So, Brad, I will call you Brad for this, please. Okay. So you were the one, I think, that would have been the first to say, yes, I recommend that we file a statement of intent with the state. And what did you predicate that on? What made you think that?
Well, actually, I suppose that it probably looked like it originated from me. About 3 years ago, the town of Holliston, through the select board, had contracted with a place called the Collins Center out of UMass to conduct a capital study of the capital needs of the town of Holliston. And all of the departments were asked to submit all of their needs and put things together so that this capital plan could be put together on a town-wide basis. During the course of that process, it was actually the consultant from the Collins Center who suggested that, well, there's an awful lot of projects here from the high school, and it's about 50-plus years old, so maybe you folks should start thinking about looking at this through a more comprehensive lens as opposed to a project-by-project lens. And that's what basically began the whole process of trying to team up with the Mass School Building Authority through a statement of interest.
So let's just describe what is a statement of interest.
So a statement of interest is basically an application that's filled out by the superintendent that tells that basically outlines the history of the building and some of the needs that we are seeing with the building, and asks for and the reasons why we think we need to have some of those needs addressed. And it goes through a process. It's a yearly process that, and you apply and are reviewed during the course of a year, and they accept a percentage of applicants into the first phase, which is called a feasibility study.
Okay. So in year 1, we didn't file. In year 2, we did file, and we were rejected. And this is now year 3 that we're still talking about this subject.
Yep.
Right? Okay.
And we may be talking about it for quite a few more years as well.
Let me ask you, so in the one that we did submit last year, we were not successful.
That's correct.
I went in and I looked at applications that did win and so forth and so on. And when you look at like East Longmeadow, and I happened to live right next door to it when I was growing up, their high school hadn't been touched since '58. It was originally built in '58. It's easy to understand why we might not have been terribly competitive in that. So as I understand it, the competition is within the group that files that year. It has nothing to do with preceding years. Nobody gets carried over. Nobody's, whatever. It's just whatever pool.
That's correct.
Okay. So this year, the school committee voted, and by the way, Stacy Raffi was going to be a part of this show. She had a death in the family and couldn't be here, but she did send a couple of comments, and she wanted to make it clear that it was a unanimous vote by the school committee in January to resubmit this year.
Yes, that's
okay.
correct.
So I did want to make sure that we at least got her voice in here. So, Brad, why would we apply again?
Why not?
Okay. Usually, like in my world of grants and stuff, you apply, you look at it, maybe you just get too tired. Maybe it's because the application process is so much easier to do a statement of interest than it is when you're applying to for grants and stuff. But tell me, what is the purpose of reapplying?
Well, the purpose of reapplying is basically if you don't ask, you're not going to, you're not going to get in. The Mass School Building Authority told us last year, and they have not updated their figures for this year that I'm aware of, but if we're accepted through their process to have the feasibility, to enter the feasibility study phase, the Mass School Building Authority will pay 48.05% of the cost of that feasibility study and any construction or work that goes on in the building as a result of that feasibility study that is funded by the voters and as agreed upon by the Mass School Building Authority. So to me, it's an opportunity to partner with the state agency that offers you some pretty significant support, not only in terms of cash, but they also have expertise that, frankly, we don't have here. I have 4 schools. I've done a lot of school construction in my career, but it's been quite a while since I've done some, and I think I think Holliston needs an objective view as to what's the best course of action for us to take with respect to this physical plant.
Did you think our application was competitive when we submitted it last year?
It's very difficult to say. I think we had a compelling application, but I had told everyone, I had told the Select Board, I had told the Finance Committee, I had told the School Committee that I would expect it to take my estimate was between 4 and 7 annual tries before we would finally get to the point where we would be invited in for a feasibility study.
Okay, so you sort of anticipated that. Okay, and has anything changed structurally, and I mean that literally structurally, right now for this upcoming one? Is there anything any different in this application? Significantly different, obviously.
The application actually is pretty straightforward. I just have to do some updating, and I could resubmit it probably in the course of a day.
Yeah, okay. That's a good kind of application.
Yes.
John, so what is the role of the Board of Selectmen in this, and what's been the history?
Well, from my understanding, the statement of interest requires the authorizing body, in this case the Select Board, to approve of it as a final sign-off. It's, I think, the final say on community support for the application, and I think it telegraphs to the School Building Assistance Program that the community is all in and would support the program once the feasibility is done and see it through to its completion. I believe the intent is to get all elected boards in line as the application moves in.
I'm pausing for a moment because there's a suggestion in what you just said that by applying for the statement of interest for feasibility study, which could come back with more than one recommendation or one priority and then maybe a secondary recommendation, and one could be to build and one could be to rehab, when do the voters get to cast a vote? I mean, are we basically saying that as soon as we submit to this, we're on a track that we're never going to get off of?
Well, I'll let Mr. Szajda answer this, but my understanding is that if we were to move into the program and got invited in, we would need to identify funding to do that. And funding comes by way of town meeting. So we would have the voters weigh in at that point.
Okay, so let me back up and just make sure. So we filed the statement of interest now. The answers came back, what, I don't even remember when they came up from the last time. But
November.
November? Okay, it seemed like it was fall, but who knows. Yep. Okay, so then come November, so the following spring, we would be going to town meeting with, well, no, because they haven't done the feasibility study.
You have to fund the feasibility study first.
You have to fund it first. Right. Okay, so so it would be that November. So nothing really happens until
spring of 21, theoretically.
Okay, right. Spring of 21 is the first time the starting gun is fired anyway on this process, as far as the voters are concerned. Okay, all right. So from your perspective, what's been your role in all of this?
Well, the role of the Finance Committee is the same role we always have, which is advise and consent, right? We don't tell the executive authority what their priorities should be. We don't tell the school committee what their priorities should be. But when they have matters of financial import, then we ask them to deal with us, obviously, because we have to make a recommendation to the town. Mm-hmm. In the case of an SOI, you just kind of outlined what our role would be, which is the decision to submit really is a decision between the school committee and the select board. When that decision comes back, right?
When an application is accepted.
Right. It's technically what they call it is you're being invited to the eligibility period, right? When that happens, and that, even though you get the communication in November, the formal decision for the eligibility period is typically December or January. They have it's a meeting of the SBA where they just publish in the minutes who they're accepting into making the invitation to. At that point, the feasibility part of it would require funding. So that would be something where we would go, it would then come to us as, okay, how much is it going to cost? We would work on a means to finance it or a recommendation on how to pay for it. The understanding would be, as Dr. Jackson pointed out, there's a reimbursement rate from the state for that, which is why, one of the, as this kind of a side note, one of the things that has been brought up before is, why don't we do the feasibility study now? And the answer is you don't do it because then we pay twice as much for it, right? So at that point, you'd fund the feasibility study. The feasibility study comes back and generally looks at 4 options, right? There's nothing. There's like a minor renovation, if you want to call it that. There's
paint and paper.
Paint and paper, right? There's major renovation, and there's replacement, new school, right? My understanding, obviously I wasn't here when the high school was built, but my understanding about that is that the MSBA will look at the study and will choose a course of action based on the results of the study. And that's the one they will provide the assistance for. In other words, if they...
So if none of the others, if you want the option 3 and they want option 4,
right,
you don't get money for option 3.
The point of the feasibility study for them is what is the best option for this facility.
For the state.
And if it comes back and the feasibility study says, hey, you don't need a new building, you just need major renovations, or you need paper and paint or whatever, right, then that's where they're going to throw their money. They're not, if the town came back and said, well, we want a new high school anyway, then they're going to be much more reticent. In fact, they won't fund it because they'll say this is not what the recommendation is for this school, for this building. So I think that's an important point too. Even if we want a high school, right, the feasibility study determines what we actually end up getting from this.
How long does the feasibility study take?
It'll be about a year.
Yeah, it's about a year.
And how much?
So we would probably, if in April we would appropriate, and probably by the next April there would be an agreed upon plan between the MSBA and the school committee that would then be brought forward for the town for funding.
Right, and the other thing I should point out is that there are timelines for this that are established by the SBA in terms of the funding. In other words, you can't sit there and submit the SOI, do the feasibility study, have it come back, and then say, okay, well, we'll come back to you in 5 years when we figure out what we're going to do about it. There's a timeline that requires that the town approve funding within a certain timetable. So you can get off the train at any time, right? None of this obligates you to spend the money, but you are on the train, so to speak, for as it goes down, you have this obligation to at least seek the funding.
If you desire to get off the train, there's a penalty for that.
Yeah.
You have to bow out at least one cycle, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Doctor?
At least. Yeah, I don't think
taking an off-ramp is not recommended once you're on it.
Well, I think taking an off-ramp is something that they would be disappointed in, yeah, and I think it would probably, put us in the penalty box for a few years, for sure. I think that's accurate.
How much does a feasibility study cost? What do they typically?
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands, definitely.
So
anywhere between, the one benefit we have here in Holliston is that the site on which the current high school is built is a nice flat piece of property, because the feasibility study is greatly impacted by their determination of what could happen in the different options, right? I explained the 4 options, right? If you're doing something like you're saying, okay, we're going to build a new high school, but we're going to build it over on some rocky ledge, and they got to do all sorts of work, not site work, but complicates the study, they can get very expensive, right? If you ask the SBA, they'll tell you they're anywhere from several $100,000 up to over $1 million, depending on the complexity of the school, the size of the school, the site, other factors. For a town this size, I would think it would be less than $1 million, but one never knows.
And we would be paying roughly half of that.
Correct.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. So let's say we jump on the train and we submit again, and you yourself, Brad, have said that it could take upwards of 5 years, or
It could, if I apply this year, we could be accepted.
right.
I mean, there's no guarantees.
We have no
in this.
idea.
No.
We have no idea. So in the meantime, the building has some maintenance or other capital needs that we've already addressed or
Yes.
identified. We haven't addressed them.
Well, we've identified them and addressed some, yes.
Okay. But for whatever is outstanding for those things, what do we do with those? What do we do with those in the meantime?
Do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
Well, in my opinion,
Go ahead.
and what Ken and Dr. Szajda certainly can disagree, but in my opinion, we have to maintain this building for its current use, and we have an obligation to the taxpayer who invested a lot of money in this building to make sure it's up to code and safe for the students and in working order. So if if a boiler went, we'd replace it. If a roof leaked, we'd fix it. If we're talking, one of the projects that the school committee I'm anticipating will likely be bringing forward as part of this year's budget process is to replace the turf on committee and field. That's a 10-year turf field that's in its 15th year, and it needs replacing. And it's been my recommendation that we replace it. We held off for 1 year on the off chance that we might get accepted, but we can't just wait around and just be in, kind of be in limbo. We have to continue to maintain the school and maintain the grounds.
Yeah, and as somebody with, I paid for the original, I was a contributor to the original building of the building back in 1970, and I got to pay Ken to remodel it in
Thank you.
2000. So, I'm going for round 3.
There you go.
Here we are. All right, so did you want to add anything to that, Ken?
What he said was entirely accurate. I mean, one of the things that's very
Wait a
important
minute, let me get that
to
Would
the
you sign
SBA.
it?
It's on film.
It's on film. That's what I want
The
here.
SBA requires that you maintain the facility. In fact, they look very negatively on
Yes.
applications
Sure.
where you've intentionally let the. So that's what my point was going to be. You have to provide that maintenance. From obviously, with any asset, you watch the investment carefully if you think a significant modification or replacement of that asset's coming. So, it doesn't mean we don't do the maintenance, but we may look at some things a little differently, and that's something we discuss from the financing side. We discuss with the school committee routinely on certain projects to say, okay, does this make sense? Is this something we could, as Dr. Jack said, maybe you delay something 1 year and put it somewhere else that's something that, you have two urgent things, but maybe one takes a backseat to the other one because of the timing of such, well, this one would be something that would be covered by a change to the building, so let's put that one a year off in case the application gets accepted.
But even if you're accepted into the program, and even if they come and do a feasibility study, the feasibility study is a year,
Oh, yeah,
and then
it's
you
many years
still
before you see it.
process of going through all of the other stuff that
Yes.
has to happen after that. So from the time that you're accepted to the time that you're moving in, you're talking 4 years?
Probably.
Well, it also depends on what the outcome of the feasibility study
Right.
is, right?
Well,
What
just
type of
make,
project it is.
Yeah.
well, that's true. That's
So,
true.
but
we're
just to
talking
be
multiple
clear,
years.
right?
Yes.
So there's no question it's multiple years. What I'm talking about, though, is let me give you make up an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that there's a unit that's an HVAC unit that's needing an excessive amount of service, and Dr. Jackson comes in and says, well, we've got this SOI in process and we need to replace this, and I'm making up numbers here. Let's say it's $250,000, right? Well, how you get that through the next 4 years may depend on what this SOI comes out to be. In other words, you may sit there and say, okay, well, let's wait a year and see if we get into the feasibility study phase, because then we'll see what we have to do. Maybe we can keep the system limping along. We just have a little higher repair bills as we're keeping it patched, versus saying, okay, this is something where we can't keep it going for 4 or 5 years, so or we're not doing anything with the SOI. We're going to have this high school forever, so replace the thing because it's going to have a 20-year lifetime, and that's going to, those are the kind. In other words, you're not letting the school fall into disrepair, but you're evaluating where the value in the decision is based on the context of how long its useful life might be. Why put $250,000 into something that might get torn down a year later, or 2 years, 3 years later, versus something that will be around for 20 years? So,
Well, how could it be torn down? Would you be able to build another school right there?
I don't even want to speculate about the site issues, right?
But
anything's possible, right? And
The whole, I mean, the options run from, as Ken said, nothing, paint and paper,
no, I understand you could
renovation
build
to
a
build a new
new
school.
But how could you build a new school on that site? Where do you put the students for the period of time that it takes?
well, it depends. It doesn't have to be in the same footprint. And again, I'm not pretending to be architect or site manager, right? But this is a big piece of property, right? What if you decided, you have the baseball fields, you have the committee and all that stuff, you got a lot of land there. You could build a new building there and then eventually move those, say, okay, for next 10 years, construction's going to be going on there, students go to here, then switch, tear this facility down and put fields over here.
Right. That's a very common approach. But that's what the feasibility study would analyze, is how do you phase this in? And obviously, we've got to stay in business while all this work is being done.
But while all this work is, well, not even, we haven't even gotten to the
All
work
that
part.
work.
All that work is in the future. All we know right now is that you're going to submit, or you may submit, a statement of interest. And as you've described it, Ken, you've described all of these permutations and possibilities and all this kind of thing that you're going to have to consider. What happens to everything else that is non-high school related? That's Placentino, that's Town Hall, that's Building 1750. I mean, those are all other demands that will have capital demands that will be banging at the door at the same time.
Yeah, welcome to my world.
Yeah.
No, I would say to you, Ken, it's our world.
Yes, it is our world, definitely.
Okay.
Right? Definitely not my pocketbook paying
Right.
for it.
So I think it's our world. So if we do go down this path, how do you negotiate that? How do you navigate that? I mean that seriously. I'm not trying to be a jerk about this, but
From the financial perspective,
Yeah.
right? There's a recognition that you can't realistically, if you look at the cost of everything that everybody would want, you can't realistically fund it all.
oh, of course
Okay.
not. Sure.
So the fact whether or not you get the high school only comes into play with really once the train gets going down the tracks, right? Because of what you said, because it's a 4 or 5 year period before and you do have to have this timeline for approving the funding. So it's important to understand whether you're on the train, right? So you submit the SOI, but at the same time, you don't hold up everything else in town because of that. However, one thing that I can say with absolute certainty, any major high school project, meaning nothing more than just a paint and paper, a major renovation, new building, is going to be debt funded. The town, frankly, doesn't have the financial resources to fork over
Sure.
whatever the cost of a new high school is, even with the 48% reimbursement, right? So in that context, right, you have to evaluate all debt-funded projects in that context. It doesn't mean you don't take out other debt, but what it means is that you look at the debt burden you're going to be potentially imposing on the town and you decide how to handle that. That is a big issue for a number of reasons. One is that, as you know, we just finished paying off Placentino and Miller.
Mm-hmm.
We have other schools that will be rolling off over the next couple of years, all the projects from the 2000s. While it was great to take advantage of the funds that were sloshing around back in 1988, 98, 99, 2000, it created this problem where the town had a ton of debt.
We did everything at one time.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So to your point, the important thing for us, or at least speaking for myself, because as a committee we haven't voted anything on this, right? But speaking for myself, the concern that I have is that we don't repeat that mistake, that we stagger our debt, we use our debt correctly so that we're not facing this idea that suddenly everybody's tax bills go up 50% for 20 years, and then you have this, the good side is we're on the other side of that bubble now, right? But it works the same way, which is, as you said, we have other debt projects we need to do, and we have the treatment plant that we approved a couple of years ago that's going to be funded, debt funded, things like that. So it's important to balance and have a view of those future debts to decide how to spread them out appropriately so that the town has a relatively even tax bill.
Well, there's really no year that's been relatively even. I mean, let's face it, it always goes up. But there are some projects, let's talk about water since you mentioned the treatment facility, okay? So that one's on the docket, but we've got a bunch of pipe that we're supposed to be putting in the ground, and we're doing it pretty slowly, and I'll never see it in my lifetime.
Right.
You know, if there were an interest in expediting that, that would be part of this consideration.
Well,
we're creating a debt ceiling for ourselves, literally.
Yeah, and the other thing, there are a couple of things so I want to say about the water, because I think there's a lot of misperceptions out there. Yes, our pipes are old. Yes, they should have been replaced a long time ago. We're in a situation where when the water system was built, the people who were running it at the time, and this is not unique to Holliston, by the way, it's not picking on anybody in Holliston, this is the way things were done in general back then, was you got money to do a project, you did the project, and then you benefited from the fact that the capital cost was done. And you know, for example, when I first moved to town, the water was, as one former FinCom member told me, the best deal in town, right? And the only reason it was the best deal in town was because the rates were way out of whack with what they should have been to fund this pipe replacement, right? Nobody ever envisioned that, okay, 25 years from now, we're going to have to replace all these pipes, so let's start building up a trust for that now. So you're faced with this difficult decision, which is you have a long period of a lack of funding, and then you have this urgent need, and then you also don't want to make the same mistake again, so you don't want to, you know, just say, okay, we're going to fix the problem now and then let it happen again 30 years from now or whatever. So with regards to the water pipes, obviously everybody in town who gets a water bill knows that the infrastructure fee was implemented to allow the pipe replacement to, right? The pipes we're putting in have a rated life of more than 100 years, okay? That's important because while it is correct that we need to replace the pipes, we will not be putting ourselves, even if we do 1 mile a year for 50 more years, right? We will not be putting ourselves in a position where at the end of that 50 years, we now have pipes that are 20 years old and need to be replaced. We'll still have decades of useful life beyond that. That's important because one of the difficulties you have with the current time is you have this past where sufficient payment was not made. So you have a catch-up contribution, so to speak, and you have a future payment contribution. So you have one generation onto which this tremendous financial burden is being placed. And I personally have not liked that. That's, for me, the water issue, is I sit there and I say, everybody in town is paying $300 on their water bill for an infrastructure fee because for 30 years, the people who were enjoying the cheap water didn't put in their fair share. So we're being asked to pay a greater share now to make up for that. But,
or the officials that were in charge of it didn't push the cause.
Right. No matter, I'm not talking about the logistics behind it. I'm just saying that from a financing point of view, the people that were using the system were not being charged the right rate, so they got an undue benefit from the system. And so I'm very big on we can't penalize this generation anymore. We've got to be reasonable. We want to put in place plans that help the future generations, but you can't just operate on theory. This generation, just to give you an example, we're paying the water infrastructure fee, right? We're paying the OPEB contribution, right? Those two alone are big dollar costs, okay? So you know, and now, by the way, we're also being asked now pay the retirement that's been behind for all these years, right? So we're not even doing that yet. We're slowly catching up, but Middlesex is way behind in terms of full funding for the pension. So you have to be very careful about these things.
I think you have to be careful, too, when you say this generation, because, as I said, some of us have been doing this, you know, for a long, long time.
I don't mean, I guess
you might want to find a different word from generation.
Well, yeah. Well, what I mean by generation is the people in town now, of any age. I'm not talking about, you know, my age or younger or older. I'm saying the people who are living in town now. So this generation of residents, so to speak, is bearing a big financial burden.
I'd like to jump in a little bit if I could.
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Szajda presents a picture that, you know, tells a story how we got to where we are. The Select Board over the last couple of years has examined this issue and has reached into past studies and has collaborated with our Department of Public Works to come up with a plan that would accelerate the water pipe replacement plan. We put forth that plan, and in conjunction with that, the improvement to our sidewalk infrastructure, which is dreadful, and the need to rebuild a new DPW facility because both of the Arch Street and Central Street facilities are dreadful, and they should be torn down. They're in very tough shape. They don't represent the combined DPW model that this town embraced several years ago. We're trying to address an infrastructure deficiency, which I think he articulated, with a plan to go forward over the next several years and eliminate the water user rate fee. With this cost would be debt funded. When we put that plan together, we put it towards the Finance Committee. They voted unfavorably for it last fall. I think they desired more detail, more connectivity of the plan to the 2011 studies that were paid for and were done. We're digging into those right now. We'll be presenting more detail to them in the next couple of weeks, because our board feels as though the infrastructure is one of the most, if not the most important things we need to do in Holliston right now. Ken, I just want to bring in the elephant in the room, which is your remark at Fall Town Meeting, relative to the Holliston infrastructure needs versus the statement of interest. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so maybe you want to just address that at this point,
Right.
because it kind of made everybody stop and think, what's going on here?
Okay. What I said at town meeting was we had an SOI. Part of the issue the Finance Committee had with what was being brought forth in October was that we believe, and we voted our opinion on this, right? So I can say that it is a committee opinion.
Right.
We have to be careful about our spending, both debt and non-debt. As we approach the end of the debt pile we accumulated earlier, right, there's a misperception, and I'm not talking about the select board, I'm saying there's a misperception around town that
In the public eye, yeah.
when these debts are paid, that suddenly there's more money available, so we should start spending it. And you heard me say at town meeting, and I've said many times, it's not the way it works. Debt exclusions go away, tax money's not there, okay?
No, but to stop the money, you should notice it in your tax bill as a taxpayer.
Oh,
There should
absolutely.
be some reduction in your tax bill.
And that's happening as we
That
speak.
is happening.
As opposed to there being a kitty of funds sitting in the general
Right.
fund waiting to be picked over.
The project's been paid for, they're done.
They're
That's right.
done.
That's right.
Okay.
So you are exactly right, and that's what I said in October. You'll see a reduction in the tax rate that is related to the expiration of the payoff of that debt,
Right.
which should, through the reduced rate, translate into a lower tax bill. Now, there are other things that add to that, so it's not you get the full amount, it's Prop 2.5 things, but yes, that it is a direct reduction of the taxes. You as a taxpayer were asked to pay a loan. When that loan payment goes away, you don't make the payment anymore.
Right.
Okay?
It's like you paid off your car.
So, but to Mr. Cronin's point about town meeting, in our opinion as a committee, there was a rush to look at that as an opportunity to borrow more money, to basically say we have debt going away, okay, and therefore it's a good time. So the taxpayers are used to paying this additional amount. So if we can fund more debt, and then it's not that bad. They're used to paying, I'll make up numbers. Let's say you're used to paying a $10,000 tax bill, a $5,000 tax bill, right? And now it's going to go down to $4,500 or something, let's say, or whatever. I'm just making up numbers here. These are not based in any of the real numbers, because the debt is expiring. Well, some people look at that and say, well, if we borrow more and keep the tax bill at $5,000, this is what they're already paying. They're going to be used to this. So we've kind of transferred the debt from one project to another, as opposed to they're going to see a reduction in $500, and then they're going to be asked to now pay that $500 in another debt payment. So there's a philosophical thing, and this gets back to what I was saying about leveling the tax bill, right? If you do it right, then yes, you can keep a reasonable debt load, and as debt expires, debt goes on, it kind of keeps your tax bill modulo Prop 2.5 relatively steady. The debt component stays relatively steady.
But I need to jump in just because I want to make sure I understand why that's not a decision. What we go into debt for, or the debt that we take on collectively, isn't your decision or your decision and your boards. It's ours as taxpayers, all of us collectively.
Correct.
So then if a board, and I'm going to take you right out of this, so let's say the Board of Assessors decides we need to spend $50,000. No, we don't do debt, so never mind, forget about that. We're not a good board to look as an example, but okay, Board of Health might decide something, but it doesn't matter. The thing is, if somebody else came forward with some debt incurring project and they wanted to do it, and philosophically you thought that it shouldn't be done because of the debt concerns that you have, does that go to town meeting, or does it die at your desk?
It doesn't necessarily die at the desk, but, and this is a very important point, the Finance Committee has a statutory role of advise and consent.
Is it consent or just advise?
Well, it's mostly advise, but
Right. I don't think it says consent.
But right, so advise. So regardless of how you phrase it, we have an obligation to make a recommendation to the town as to whether an item deserves
Absolutely.
funding or not.
That's
right?
absolutely what you're supposed to do.
So with regards to things like what was proposed in the fall, okay, the issue wasn't that the Finance Committee sat there and said, we don't want sidewalks, we don't want water pipes, okay? The issue that we had at that time was we felt not enough work had gone into the analysis of what these projects would require. So we didn't feel comfortable going to the town and saying, start this process, to your point about getting on the train, right?
Right.
Don't get on the train unless you've thought about where it's going.
Okay, and that's not what that's,
Right.
I wasn't
I
speaking to that
think he has another
specifically.
part of his sentence
Right,
that died in
okay.
here, so.
Yeah. Well,
Waiting for.
Right. So the issue from the Finance Committee's point of view was that we were looking at this and we said the dollar value of all these projects combined. We didn't even know what they were, right? How much, when we do the sidewalk study, how much is it going to be? We do the pipes, well, with pipes we kind of have an idea, but things like this, and we sat there and said, we don't even know what the high school, the SOIs in there, we don't even know what that's going to be. Altogether, this is going to be a large pile of debt everybody's going to want. Now, does it make sense to fund a study if you know in advance that you may not be able to fund the project that the study recommends, right? Or that
I'd
you
like
have,
to debate that one.
right? Well, that's fine. We can debate it. But from the Finance Committee's point of view, right, when we're asked to say, would you recommend that we proceed with this work? Our answer was, not at this time. We don't know enough about them. And I'll give you an example of where that process works very well, okay? You remember we now have a facilities coordinator. It's a slide. I don't know if you've hired one yet, but that facility coordinator, facilities manager position, right, was something that was, raised to the Finance Committee. We said, yeah, we have no problem with this. We think this is a good thing for good value for the town. The town needs somebody like this. But it did not go through town meeting the first time with a favorable, we didn't, I think it was actually, did we pull it from the warrant? I don't remember. But before it went on the warrant for the fall, it was either meant to be or on a prior warrant and was either pulled or whatever. But it was, the reason for that was the exact same thing. We sat there and we said, okay, we're being asked to go to the town and say, we think this is a good idea. But at the time, the information we had was not clear. We had different opinions coming from different parts of the town. We had one person saying, this person should report here, and another person saying should report there. One person saying, I don't know what I'm going to do is supervising this. There was confusion as to what the position was. So from the Finance Committee's point of view, our judgment was, let's take this off the warrant or not act on it now. Let's figure out what the position needs to be, get a real job description, work out the organizational structure, work out what the future plan is going to be when you bring this person on. What if they come in and say they need people? What is the plan? Are they going to manage the schools? Are they not going to manage the schools? All those questions. And what ended up happening was the Select Board, to their credit, Mr. Cronin especially, went out and basically answered all those questions, came back, said, here's the revised proposal with all these questions answered. We had a discussion about it. We said, now we have sufficient data to say we should go forward with this. And it was funded, and we're moving forward with it.
Could I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have to bring him back to his comment. So there was a remark made at town meeting, Ken, where you said, we cannot support these public work infrastructure issues while we have a statement of interest looming.
Yes.
So Dr. Jackson said moments ago, we'll be applying every single year, perhaps for the next 4 to 7, until and if we get entry into the program. Does that mean, this is to Mary Greendale's question earlier on, Ken, does that mean between now and whenever that gate opens, that all other studies, all of the capital plans are held hostage until the statement of interest is known?
No. No.
I'd love to hear why not.
Okay. Why not? Because
that's what you said.
No, that's what I said
Can I
about.
just stop one moment?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to breathe. And Brad, how are you?
I'm doing great.
It seems like,
He's
why
all
did I
tanned up.
ask
He's-
you here?
I'm just
Got a
trying
San Diego
to. I'm just
tan.
trying
He's
not
doing
to get
great.
hit with any stray bullets. I'm having a grand old time. Just let me.
I don't know why I asked you here. Wasted your time.
Well, it's his SOI.
The reason, this is an important conversation because the town of Holliston is facing two big elephants. That's what's happening here. And it is a challenge that we as a community are facing.
Yeah.
We have a 50-plus-year-old high school that had a little bit more than a paint and paper renovation back in 2002.
It was $26 million.
It was.
$26 million.
Expensive paint.
Yeah, it was
It's Benjamin
top of the line.
And we are faced with water infrastructure challenges as well. These are going to be issues that this community is going to have to wrestle with, and there's going to be agreements, disagreements, and challenges. Neither of those problems or challenges or issues is going away.
No, it's not going away. Definitely isn't.
And
Dr. Johnson's
it's going to be a very important. This is a very important conversation for this community to have beyond the boards.
To Dr. Jackson's point about the competing costs and priorities.
I didn't say competing. I'm not trying to be. I don't,
No,
I'm
there are
not
two elephants. There are two elephants, not
We
that.
put
friendly
together a
ones,
model
competing ones.
that we had a brief meeting about in public last Wednesday, I think it was, and it was just a first pass at looking at the big numbers. How would it look if we bonded the infrastructure issues with the school models that size and scope to be determined? And the numbers jump off the page in a very scary way. They really do. I won't get into the details, but the model showed in the one column what the average taxpayer over the last 20 years, as we've gone through the last infrastructure improvements, have cost. Then you go into the infrastructure, then you go into the high school, and the numbers more than double for what it would cost if they all happened at once, according to the scope and size and cost that we've originally thought of. So there's no question that we have some working, compromising to do and some thoughtful exercises to pulse these needs for the community's benefit. My problem is we're going to be seeing Dr. Jackson hopefully soon in our board meeting as you come before us again for another statement of interest. And I want to find out if I put my hand up and I support the statement of interest that my colleagues on the Finance Committee are going to look at any future study requests, which we've told them they're coming. We're bringing them back with more detail if we're going to be held hostage again by a looming statement of interest. That is a huge issue for me. Because if that is the case and the Finance Committee in totality feels as though, look, we can't give you a green light if you've got a $75 million high school looming, then
we're stuck.
we
We're
need
stuck.
to make some decisions as a select board on what those priorities from an executive level will be for the
And when
town.
I say we, I mean collectively. Everybody's stuck because, the thing I spoke to last year was the study for the sidewalks. I'm a biggie on sidewalks because I'm on them a lot. It's one little word that we haven't thrown. Yeah, be careful, you're telling me. So it's one little word that I'm going to throw in there in addition to all of the bigger elephants. We got this little one over here,
Right.
But you want them to be able to walk to school. Those little sidewalks need to be better.
Right.
We're running out of time. I want to make sure everybody gets sort of a last crack here. But Ken,
Okay.
so where is the answer to that?
Okay, the answer to that is you don't have to hold an SOI hostage to the other needs of the town. What happened in October, and just to give you a couple of examples, we had a water study about the pipes.
Right.
A comment that was made at the town meeting was about the brown water. Brown water has nothing to do with the pipes.
Right.
That's the treatment plant we've already funded.
Right. Got it.
Okay. There was in talking to our DPW director ahead of that town meeting, you know what he told me, and I don't know what he told anybody else, but he told me was, most important thing in this town is a source water study because we're going to need more water at some point, and that's a 5 to 10 year process. So again, when somebody says, okay, we want to accelerate the pipes, I'm like, well, yes, we know we got a pipe problem, but source water is going to be an even bigger problem. So, okay, there are things like that. The sidewalk study, right? You heard me at town meeting talk about the Complete Streets grant, how it says this grant will fund part of this work. So why are we paying for it now? So the objections to the studies were not solely based on, I did make this statement, and that was a final nail in the coffin from our perspective, was nobody can tell us what this debt actually is going to look like, and we have this looming potential high school issue. So let's slow it down a little bit, right? And that's kind of what I said. With this looming SOI, going forward, as Mr. Cronin pointed out, we had a meeting last Wednesday where the first time I finally got to see what they're looking at as debt, and we can have that conversation. So it gets back to what I said earlier about there's no rush. Okay? Yes, there is a rush in the sense that we want to have sidewalks, we want to have a water infrastructure, right? But we also don't want to do it wrong. And I'll give you a perfect shining example of doing it wrong. The reason we're having this conversation today about a new high school is because when you look back at that renovation that was done in 2000, it was not done the way it should have been done. And I'm not talking about shoddy workmanship. I'm saying things like, how do you renovate a high school and not replace the windows? Things like that. Okay? I was just new to town at that point, so I don't know the history behind that. But I will tell you that from what I've heard and all the data I've gathered over the years, there was a feeling that we've done something for the middle school, we've done something for the elementary school, we got to do something for the high school. That's not a reason to throw money at the high school, right? It should have been done because it needed it. There should have been a very clear plan as to what it needed, and so forth and so on. It's history now. But the point is that you also can't look at that as a result and say, well, we did a renovation before and it was terrible. Just because you botched it the first time, maybe we learn and we do it right the next time if they come back and say, do a renovation. But the point I want to make is we're not holding up all debt because of the SOI. What we are saying is, let's be intelligent about it, and we did not have enough information in October to move forward, and that, as I said, that was one of many reasons why we came out with unfavorable recommendations.
I want you all to think about something. I was doing some digging around in old minutes recently, and I was reminded that back in the late 80s when I was on the Board of Selectmen, the first time, we used to have town meeting as needed, and it could be 6 or 8 times a year. Take that home. Think about that one. Mm-hmm. How great fun that was.
Well, I also know that some meeting minutes from way back in this town for Board of Selectmen meetings where we met. So things change over time.
Yeah, it was the idea. Can you imagine all of these debates going on just ad nauseum year? Yeah.
I hold out great promise. I have a lot of respect for the gentleman at this table and for you as well. We have a lot of talent in this town. Over the next several weeks, we're going to be spending a lot of time together and trying to work out some of these details. I'm very hopeful. We have compromises within reach, and the town will hear a clear message.
And to that point, just to
wrap up, because we're at 46 minutes.
To make this a kumbaya moment for everybody.
I was thinking of kumbaya, too.
I think there's often a miscommunication about what I call creative tension, right? There's no requirement in this town that all boards agree on everything. Right?
No, there isn't.
And it's actually good that we don't agree on some things.
Absolutely.
So I think that oftentimes when we go to town meeting, yes, we don't like to have disagreements on the floor of town meeting, but at the same time, I never walked out of October town meeting with any less respect for the select board because I had to get up there and voice a contrary opinion, right? So I think sometimes people get worked up about that, and they say, oh, you don't get along with John, or I'm like, that's not true. Mr. Cronin and I have talked regularly. I talked to Mr. Rooney, I talked to Ms. Hine as necessary, and none of it is personal. They have a role and responsibility. Sure. We have a role and responsibility. We're all doing the jobs we were elected to do.
I'll tell you, the thing that I sometimes worry about is that you forget that the debate should be at town meeting. Don't make so many of the decisions inside your committees that you never let the town voters, who are supposed to be the ones who get to decide, have the opportunity to do it. Mm-hmm. And if there are disagreements, that's fine with me, because conversation, this is supposed to be really democratic, small d, and that means I get to hear from both sides. So it doesn't bother me. And when I walked out of town meeting last time and people saying, oh my God, what's going on? I said, this is democracy at work. This is how it's supposed to be. So let it go. Anyway, guys, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Brad, I'm really glad you could be with us. We'll bring you back when we can get you to talk a little more.
Oh, that's okay. I had fun.
As long as his SOI gets approved by the select board, he's happy to be here.
He's cool.
No, we need water too, and sidewalks.
Well, actually, all of it relates to the schools in one way or another. Okay, folks, that's it for this show. We'll be seeing you again soon. Actually, in the next 2 months, we're going to be here a lot because this is election time. Candidates have papers out and that kind of thing right now. So we'll be back very soon. Right now, goodbye and good luck. See you next time.